Always got crazy hair. Ah. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Let's see. Just make sure everybody can hear me okay before we begin. Awesome. Great. Awesome. Just wait for everybody to join in here. And then we'll finish off our discussion of chapter 2. Hopefully provide some opportunity for some more discussion, just like last time. And let's see, while I'm waiting, let's share my screen. All right. There we go. All right. So this is where we left off. Oh, am I missing a slide? Oh, I do seem to be missing a slide. Oh, well. Yeah, we were talking about essences. Oh, shoot. I'm going to have to go back to the old slides for a second. Oh, my slow computer. Oh, geez. Oh, well, it's okay. People are still showing up, so. Ah, I left off this slide. Oh, no. No, where? What? What the heck? What the heck is going on here? Ah, okay, here we go. Sorry, everybody. I don't know why I'm so off the ball here, but right, we had just finished talking about essences. And what we had discussed there was the fact that once we start getting into the middle or the latter half of the 20th century, philosophers start to deny the possibility that we can characterize technology by finding, its essence, right? I talked a lot about necessity and sufficiency last time as a sort of way that I suppose philosophers might try to characterize essential features of something. I mean, they're different features. It's necessity and sufficiency. So we're really talking about the classical definition of concepts here. But the continental approach, where you've got thinkers like Heidegger or Ellul, they were the ones hunting for a sort of essence of technology to try and define what it is. Later on, though, we start to think that maybe this isn't the right way to go about things. Maybe we cannot define technology this way. So how should we define it? Well, we can lay out some guidelines, and Dusek does this on page 30. And remember, before we discussed essences, we talked about pricing definitions or precising definitions. These are definitions that sort of reflect the way we ordinarily use words, but also we attempt to sort of hone and sharpen those definitions at the same time. So it's not just like dictionary definitions. I mean, yes, we are looking at how words are used, but we're trying to sort of sharpen that use too. Any definition of technology, Dusek says, will probably be this kind of definition. But there are some more guidelines that would be useful for us. One is that a definition should not be too broad or narrow. So we don't want our definition to include things that the word isn't normally used to designate. And we also don't want it to be too narrow so as to exclude things that should probably fall under that term, right? And this is a particular problem with the word technology, right? We kind of encountered this when we were discussing how educators might define technology, right? Maybe an educator would have a strict definition of technology simply as the electronics used in the classroom, right? But that wouldn't include the blackboard, which is technically technology, right? So we want to avoid that. And we also don't want a circular definition. We want to avoid circularity at all costs. We already bumped into this problem when we were talking about inductivism all the way back in chapter 1, right? Remember that inductive reasoning is reasoning from specific cases, observation of specific cases, to general principles or rules or laws or anything like that, really. We justify this use because it's worked in the past, which is also a form of induction, right? You know, let's bring it back to the example of the swans, right? If every swan I see is white, and then I conclude that swans are white birds, their plumage is white, that's inductive reasoning. And if you say, well, how do you know inductive reasoning is reliable? And I say, well, inductive reasoning works. And we know that because inductive reasoning, that's circular, right? Another famous example is the Cartesian circle from Rene Descartes. It's one of my favorites. Descartes thinks that all, Descartes a rationalist. So knowledge comes from the intellect. If you have, you can know something if you can grasp it with reason, if you can have a clear and distinct idea about it. And Descartes has a clear and distinct idea of God. So he knows God exists. But he also says that God is the sort of guarantor of his clear and distinct ideas. God would not mislead him. So that's called the Cartesian circle. How can I trust my clear and distinct ideas? Well, because of God. How do I know God exists? Well, because of my clear and distinct ideas, right? It's a circle. And we don't want to do that here. We don't want to be like, well, technology is anything technological. And we don't want to define technological as anything pertaining to technology, right? That would be a circular definition, and we don't want that. We want some kind of outside justification for our definition. And we should try to avoid figurative language or metaphors, right? So metaphors, metaphors say this is that, like, like John is a bulldozer. John is not literally a bulldozer, but maybe when I say that, I simply mean that John is big and strong and can move a lot of material around like a bulldozer, right? We don't want that with technology. We want precise definitions. All the world's a stage, right? Yeah, that's excellent. Of course, Shakespeare, excellent, excellent metaphors, and some good similes too. So we don't want metaphors or similes or other figurative language. We want precise language. And the definition shouldn't be negative. We want a positive definition. We don't want to try and define technology just by saying what it's not, right? We want to say what it is. For comparison, you can check out box 2.2, which is about something called negative theology. Negative theology is really interesting because negative theology is an area of theology where theologians try to understand God with negative definitions, because God is supposed to be this, incomprehensible being, ultimately beyond our grasp. There's limits to what we can understand about God, some theologians say. So we try to understand God by listing everything that God is not, right? So maybe a negative theologian would say, well, God is not evil, God is not a person, not this or that, right? So we can actually say something positive, not in the sense of good, but positive in the sense that it adds something to our knowledge, right? Likewise in negative, we're not talking about negative as in bad. We're talking about negative as in things that we can say are not the case, right? So that's very important. Another thing, since we're on the topic of definitions for your reading responses, if you are defining a word, there's something you should know about in philosophy. It's called the use-mention error. So this is actually very important. There's a difference between using a word and mentioning a word. So my favorite example, this was from a class I taught a little while ago that I took over for a colleague. It was a linguistics class. It was really fun. The prof in that class used the example word cheese, right? So let us say that I'm using the word cheese. If I'm using the word cheese, I'm using it in a sentence like, oh boy, I've got to get some cheese at the grocery store, right? I'm actually using the word to refer to cheese, right? But if I'm mentioning the word, I'm not using the word to refer to any kind of referent. If I'm mentioning the word, I'm just mentioning it, right? So an example of that would be like, like I'm talking about the word itself and not the kind of thing that is cheese. So if I'm mentioning the word, that's something like the word cheese is an English word, right? Or the word cheese in English translates to the word fromage in French. I'm mentioning the words. I'm not using them to refer to their reference. So if you're defining technology or talking about the word technology, to indicate that you're mentioning it, it needs to be in quotation marks. When you're using it to refer to actual technology, no quotation marks. And that's, excuse me, got a little excited there. And that's actually a very important distinction. So just by way of letting you know that for your reading responses. So are there any definitions of technology that we can think of that might violate any of these guidelines? A definition of technology that we can think of that's maybe a little too broad or narrow, circular, is figurative or metaphorical, or which is maybe not solely negative, but too negative. Technology as opposed to nature. So like technology, like you mean like technology is just what is artificial as opposed to what is natural? If that's what you mean, I would say, yeah. If that's what
you like in general, when they use the argument of like, I don't know, like it's divine, like the spirit of humans, because it's not nature and it's going against the natural laws and some stuff like that.
Yeah. I would say that that's a good example of something that's a bit too broad, right? Like if I say technology is everything that's artificial, as opposed to what is natural, well, I mean, what about art, right? Is art technology? I don't think so, right? So yeah, that's a good example. Max, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I think a definition that's a bit too broad and a bit too narrow is the definition of hardware and technology in the textbook, because there's a huge question of like, okay, what about like organic technology? Like, what about technology, like organic hardware without the use of tools? So it's like on one hand, we're discussing like hardware as like a physical thing that's created and used, but then like I think it's also too narrow because in terms of like human relations with technology, there's going to be like a means and relationship that's established with other people, you know, even someone that creates the hammer and the person that uses the hammer. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems a bit too broad to just assume that it can be both organic and inorganic, but also too narrow to just call it hardware, you know, just call it a non-breathing thing. Because, you know, what about pets? You know, what about dogs that we breed to be like hunting dogs and they have the inherent genetic characteristics that we've chosen? Is that a technology? Is that an organic hardware? I mean, it is under the law. It's your property if you own an animal.
Yeah, but I don't know. Could that be too broad? I think that organic technology might be, I think we can talk about this when we talk about those, like, did anyone see in the news recently about the artificial life, the little cellular things, like, yeah, maybe some nanotechnology like that. That seems to be technology, but it doesn't seem like hardware because it's organic, right? It's maybe like wetware or something, right? So yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
Just because like Mumford was talking about like the first machine being like organized human labor.
Yeah.
So it's like you're literally referring to humans as units that perform tasks based off of a set of rules outlined by a controller. So it's like,
yeah. And maybe if you had and if those humans also had animals, you know,
or they're using tools.
Yeah, draft animals or copper tools. The pyramids is Mumford's example, I think, right? Like that all of the workers building the pyramids were essentially a giant machine, which is kind of interesting, but I don't know if that is, I really don't know. I'm not sure where I've settled on that so far, right?
Yeah, me too. That's what I wrote about for the the assignment. So who knows?
Yeah. But Jonah in the chat, yeah, that's a good point. And that's similar to the draft animal example, right? Maybe if I had an attack dog, maybe that's part of my technological apparatus, right? If I'm in the military. So okay. So then we go on, which I think I can now open. I can now go on with the next slides. Let's just close these ones. More in the chat. Yeah, K9 units, like a unit. Yeah, Max. Yeah, like so maybe there is, I mean, maybe there's some senses in which this is true in certain contexts, and maybe there's others where it doesn't work, right? This is how this, you see why it's hard. You see why people gave up at trying to come up with an essence for all of this, right? Because this is tricky stuff. So now we're going to move on to some possible potential definitions of hardware. Let's just get myself up in this corner here. All right. So one definition of technology is as hardware, right? And this is very intuitive, very straightforward. It includes technology as tools, machines, simple tools to the most complicated machines, right? Hammers are technology. Rocket ships are technology. It's all technology. Oh yeah, that's an interesting question. Maybe the breeding methods. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm really not sure where I am with the animal examples. Maybe after we've gone over some of these definitions, we can see where they might fit. So yeah, hardware, very intuitive, very easily understood definition of technology, and it probably underlies a lot of our discussion of technology, even when we're not explicitly mentioning that's what we mean by hardware, right? If we were to come up with some stipulative definition of technology as, you know, something, this is one definition that we'd have to worry about sneaking back in our discussion, right? Because we're so used to we're just so used to thinking of technology as tools and machines, right? But there's a problem. This problem is that technology as hardware definition doesn't really work when, oh my goodness, I'm so sleepy. It doesn't really work when what we're claiming to be technology is neither a tool nor machine. So similar to what Max was talking about a little while ago. So behavioral technology in psychology, for example, which is related to languages technology and the cognitive sciences. So these are not tools or machines, right? In psychology, behavioral technology is an idea that comes from the behaviorists, the sort of tools, the tools we have at our disposal from learning to engage with the world. And here, languages technology is that's an idea that's due to Andy Clark. Andy Clark has a really interesting example in his book Mindware, where he discusses how language works to help us assimilate higher order concepts. And so in that sense, it kind of works as a cognitive technology. It allows us to label concepts, which allows us to acquire more concepts, more second order concepts, third order, basically to think deeper, thanks to language. So, and like Max mentioned a moment ago, you know, Mumford in 1966 even claimed that the earliest machine was mass organized labor. He called it the mega machine. So if you think of how the pyramids were built, right? The pyramids are a really interesting example because we actually do, contrary to, you know, some pseudo historical shows on the History Channel, we actually do have a pretty good idea of some of the construction that went into the pyramids. It was a kind of labor as tribute kind of thing. It was not slave labor. These were trained artisans, stone workers, who had to pay a sort of tribute to the pharaoh, because the pharaoh is a sort of god king in ancient Egypt. Remember, the pyramids are like old kingdom, right? So we're talking a long time ago. But the Egyptians had simple technology, copper tools, ropes, maybe some draft animals, maybe some simple cranes, not very complicated machinery, right? What was more important was probably how all those people were organized, right? People at the quarry, people overseeing things, people making sure that the people were doing the work were getting fed, right? The mega machine. I think this is interesting. This reminds me of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. So Thomas Hobbes was an English empiricist back in the day. He actually lived during the English Civil War. And the cool thing about Thomas Hobbes's book Leviathan is he describes the state as a giant artificial person, right? The state for Hobbes is like an artificial man, a machine, an automaton. And of course, Hobbes thinks of living beings as machines anyway. Uh, right off the bat in Leviathan, he's very clear about that. Like, you know, what is the heart but a spring? What are the joints but so many wheels? So Thomas Hobbes is talking about the state as a machine, as an artificial person made up of many small individual people. And that kind of reminds me of what Mumford is saying here about technology. So maybe that's a definition of technology that might be interesting to talk about. The state as technology. Ooh, I don't know. Is that too broad or too narrow? Is it too weird? I don't know. But maybe that's something one of you would like to talk about down the road somewhere. Yeah, cool. Yeah, Max, it would be interesting to think about. I haven't had enough coffee or sleep to think about it deeply now, but it's just something that I wanted to mention, you know, while I was discussing Mumford here. So another definition, which is really cool, is technology as rules. This is a cool little dictum here that you can use to remember this. Go away. Rules rather than tools. So technology is not about, you know, tools and machines. It's rules. And Jacques Ellul considered these rule-following behaviors, patterns of rule-following behavior, which he called technique, to be the essence of technology. So everything from cookbooks to propaganda to sex manuals is technology here, not tools, right? And this you can kind of see how this might be intuitively appealing, right? Very similar to how technology like this operates, right? If I have a smartphone or a computer, like I'm talking to you now, that computer is a discrete state machine. It's digital, can only be in one state at a time, and the state that it's in is determined by the machine's previous state and you know, what rules it's implementing, the program it's running, right? Computer programs are basically a whole bunch of rules that tell the computer what to do, right? So this certainly seems to be true of like information technology. So if you think of computer software technology, but it also includes cookbooks, right? Think about it. A cookbook is like a computer program. It really is. You know, a computer program will have statements like, if a certain set of conditions obtains, then do this, right? And cookbooks are just like that, right? Gather all your ingredients. Okay, now preheat your oven. When the oven's preheated, begin roasting your chicken or whatever, right? And same with propaganda, sex manuals, you know, this makes the Kama Sutra technology, right? Which would make technology very old, because the Kama Sutra is a very old book. So Skinner's psychological technology, which is, again, you know, the sort of abilities we've acquired via conditioning, because remember, Skinner's a behaviorist, and according to the behaviorists, all learning is the product of conditioning, association, reinforcement, right? The bell rings, the dog salivates. Along with Mumford's mega machine and of course, Ellul's own definition, don't pose problems here, right? Why is that? Well, look, Skinner's psychological technology, ironically enough, seems pretty rule-based, even though the behaviorists weren't looking, you know, to give an algorithmic account of the mind. They thought that was a dumb idea. They would never have thought, actually, no, they would never have thought of that, because this is like pre-Turing, pre-Alan Turing. But it works, you know, we come up with social rules, conventions, which we learn via conditioning. Same with Mumford's mega machine. You know, imagine all those workers building the pyramids. There are rules like, you know, simple rules like, okay, when it's time for your shift, you have to get up and go to your shift and start chiseling away at the quarry or stacking stones on the pyramid or something, right? But there's also other rules, like rules of the trade, like how to actually cut these stones properly. how to get the stone onto a boat so that you can sail it up to the Giza Plateau, right? So some of the examples of technology that we've already looked at fit nicely in this understanding of technology. That is technology as rules. So remember, rules rather than tools. On this field, tools and machinery, they might still be part of technology, but they're not as important of, rule following, patterns of rule following behavior, and means end systems, right? So that's technology as rules. What do we have next? Let's go to the chat first. Oh, yeah. Julianne, absolutely. I suppose it would. Yeah. Yeah. That's real. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Would religion be considered technology? Yeah. Like if you're following it, like Max says, okay, Max writes, if someone is using the book as an item containing rules, the instructions that the user then follows to cook, does that person... Oh, you're talking about the cooking example. Well, it's similar, like, well, there's even some crossover here, like, because some religions have dietary regulations, right? So yeah, like you have to, if you're Jewish and you're keeping kosher, or if you're a Muslim and you keep halal, so you're not going to eat any pork, right? That's a rule, and you want to follow the rule, right? And then if you pick up your cookbook, and it says to use pork, well, maybe you'll swap it out for chicken, right? But you still follow the procedure of the recipe. And of course, many other examples too. I mean, a lot of religions, have specific instructions about how worship is supposed to happen, right? I think Islam is probably the best example. Specific times of day where you're required to pray, and the timing is because the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. The timing is actually very, very precise. Now that I'm talking about this is very interesting because like the rules for what time to pray and those patterns of behavior might be technology. But I remember my coworker back at my part-time job, nice gentleman who, was a Muslim, and he took his faith very seriously. And he also had like an app on his phone, right? Some of you are probably familiar with this, what I'm about to say, but he's got like an app that, lets you know the window for when you're supposed to make certain prayers, right? And that's based on some pretty complicated stuff, like which way is Mecca, what time is it, where is it that time, and so on and so forth. And that's on this combined with so there's hardware and rules in that example. So yeah, so that's an interesting example. Would this be circular? Like, I don't think so. You mean like if we define technology as patterns of rule following behavior and means end systems? Is that what might be circular? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's circular to say that technology is more about rules rather than tools, because we're providing some outside justification for that claim, right? We're saying like, oh, here are some examples. I'm not, it might be broad. Yeah, Abraham, that's a good point. It might be a very broad definition. There's rules. There's means and reasoning and patterns of rule following when we play poker or chess. Are those games technology? Maybe it is a bit broad. So that's a good point. All right, so let's see what's on the next slide. system. Slides going crazy. Another definition of technology is technology as a system. So this is really cool. I really like these examples. The idea of technology as a system is that outside of the context of human use and understanding, tools and machinery might not function as technology at all, right? So consider this example. This is from Dusek, page 32. An airplane, perhaps crashed or abandoned, sitting deserted in the rainforest, will not function as technology. It might be treated as a religious object by members of a cargo cult in the Pacific. You know, the cargo cults arose when US planes during the Second World War dropped huge amounts of goods on Pacific islands, and cults awaited the return of the big birds. This is actually true. It's really interesting. In the Second World War, you know, the United States is engaged in this sort of island hopping campaign in the Pacific. And, you know, the planes are dropping supplies to people, to troops who are island hopping, to indigenous folks who are living on the island. You know, some of these uncontacted peoples saw these airplanes and people coming in airplanes and thought that they were gods or something, right? So say there's a crashed airplane on one of these islands, you know, to the people that live there, it's not technology at all. It's an object of maybe religious worship, right? This piece of technology is not functioning as technology because it's not in the right system. It's not within a system of, you know, not within a context of the right context of use and understanding. So that's why the people on these islands, they actually eventually built these airplanes, like model airplanes, out of sticks and leaves and stuff, and put them out on display to try to get the big birds to come back. So yeah. Other examples. Let's see. Come on. My computer's so slow. Another example from page 32. The Shah of Iran during the 1960s attempted to forcibly modernize the country. He used the oil wealth to import high technology such as jet planes and computers, but lacked sufficient numbers of operators and service personnel. It has been claimed that airplanes and mainframe computers sat outside, accumulating sand and dust or rusting as housing for storage, and the operating and repair staffs for them were not made available. The machinery did not function as technology. Just a little context there for those who aren't in the know. The Shah of Iran was kind of like an American installed or an American backed sort of leader, like the president, I guess, or king of Iran before the revolution. When the Iranian Revolution happened, that's when like Ayatollah Khomeini took over, and they kicked the Americans out. What's that movie with Ben Affleck? Argo. You want to know, if you want to watch a movie about it, Argo, where a bunch of Americans are stuck in Iran during the revolution. They're trying to get out. They have to hide at the Canadian embassy. And then the CIA comes and they make up this story that, oh, we're a film crew from Canada and we're scouting to make a science fiction film in Iran. And that's how they were able to sneak them out. So yeah, and so prior to the revolution, when the Shah is trying to modernize Iran, he's getting all this advanced technology, but he doesn't have the people to use it, right? We're getting all this technology, but we don't have computer scientists, and we don't have enough pilots, right? We have the technology, but we still have to train the people that are going to use it, or perhaps import them, right? So the machinery there was not in the right kind of system to function as technology. And another interesting example at the bottom, I'll just read it out loud real quick. Technological hardware not functioning as technology is not solely the province of indigenous societies or developing nations, but can also be present in a milieu of high-tech urban sophisticates. Non-Western technology was displayed in an exhibit of primitive and modern art at the Museum of Modern Art. That's in New York, as purely aesthetic or artistic phenomena. Indigenous implements and 20th century Western abstract art and 20th century Western abstract art objects were exhibited side by side to emphasize similarity of shape and design. The labels of the primitive implements often did not explain their use, only their place and date. The use of these devices for cooking, navigation, and other purposes was not explained in the captions. In some cases, neither the museum visitors nor even the curators knew the technological function of the objects. Therefore, although the artifacts were simultaneously both technology and art for their original users, they were not technology, but solely art for the curators and viewers of the museum exhibit. So that's really interesting. Imagine that you go to a museum and there's an artifact being displayed as art, which at one point for someone in the distant past or far away in an indigenous community somewhere is a tool, but we don't know what its purpose is, and we think it's art, right? It's not functioning as technology for us. It's kind of like, imagine some aliens find my phone in the far future. And maybe I have one of those moving backgrounds, one of those cool moving backgrounds on my phone that looks really neat. The aliens find it, they see the cool moving background, and they think it's some kind of human art, and they stick it in a museum. That's what this is like, right? But this is not art, it's technology. I mean, it could be art. I could use it to make art. I can use it to appreciate art. But for the aliens, it's not technology, it's just art. This is the same with this exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art. Like the Antikythera mechanism. Well, if you were to display the Antikythera mechanism as art, which I suppose, yeah, when people go, yeah, thanks, Jonah, for the link. That's for cow tools. I'm not going to open the link because my computer's too slow, but I will check this out after. Just, okay, for Far Side. Oh, okay. Well, okay, I have to go then. I like Far Side. We'll just have to be patient while my computer catches up. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this comic, and it's people have tried to interpret it, but just like the tools, none of them make any sense except for what's clearly a saw, but none of them apparently have any purpose.
Right.
Or none that we can understand.
Yeah. The cartoon confused many readers who wrote or phoned in seeking an explanation. That's amazing. Yeah. Apparently the thrust of the cartoon is that if the cow were to make tools, they would lack something in sophistication. Arguably the most loathed Far Side strip ever. Oh, that's a bit brutal. I think it's kind of funny. But yeah, it's like we're looking at the cow tools, right?
Yeah. We're looking at his tools, and we can kind of make out that one of them is like our tools, but the other three we have no clue what they could be used for.
Right. And we just maybe would stick them in a museum and call it cow art, right?
We stick it in the Sunday paper.
Yeah.
Call it cow tools.
Yeah. Just to go back to the Antikythera mechanism, this one is tricky because the Antikythera mechanism. Okay, who's not familiar with this? Okay. This is really cool. This is gonna blow your minds. The Antikythera mechanism is a computer. It was found in the Mediterranean or the Aegean Sea, I believe. Yeah. Oh, you mean because of when they first found it? Oh, I see. Right. They did not understand what it was when they first found it. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, you're right about that. We do know what it was now, and this is pretty mind-blowing. The Antikythera mechanism is an old computer, like ancient Greek old. I know that that sounds crazy, but it was like a clock. It was a clockwork mechanism, and it was probably used for navigation and for doing some astronomy. It's an early computer, a very early computer, probably one of the earliest, if not the earliest. But yeah, that's a good point. We didn't know what it was for a long time. So maybe we would have put it in a museum and just called it art, right? Okay. See if I can get my slide to change. Come on now. There we go. Terrible computer. Okay. So this all gives rise to, I'm quoting Dusek here, this gives rise to the notion of a technological system that includes hardware as well as the human skills and organization that are needed to operate it and maintain it. Cool. But what about technology as applied science? Well, that's kind of where we get to, you know, 20th, 21st century. A lot of people think of technology as applied science, right? Certainly a lot of present day technology is applied science. But Dusek thinks that if we were to try and define all technology as applied science, this would be both systematically and historically misleading, right? Why is that? Well, if we understand the word science the way we use it now, and notice how it's in quotes because I'm using the word, because I'm mentioning the word, not using it. If we understand this word the way we understand it now, then science is only 400 or so years old, right? But technology is much, much older, right? Most of our history, because we didn't have science. Even if you go back to the ancient Greeks, right? They had mathematical descriptions of nature, but they didn't do any experimentation. In ancient China, there was some pretty advanced technology, but no notion of like mathematical laws or anything like that. So, you know, science as we understand it today is quite new, even though the roots go back pretty far. So technology, oh my goodness, technology actually seems to be older than science. So if it's older than science, how can it be applied science? That's kind of the way the argument goes. It may also depend, though, like how broad or narrow our definition of science is. You know, what I said before, that's if we treat science as something that's only been around for a few hundred years. Maybe that's too narrow. Maybe we can broaden our definition of science a little bit to include trial and error, to the use of induction. Well, then a lot of ancient technology might count as applied science, but that might be very broad, right? Might be a little too broad for our purposes. So according to Dusek, well, before I read this part, so we have this worry about broadness and narrowness with how we define science and technology. But even if we do think of technology as applied science, science meaning, you know, the science that modern science, which began with Galileo and through Newton, modern stuff like that. Even if we just mean that, even after, Dusek says, the rise of early modern experimental science and the notion of scientific laws in the 17th century, and the development of the technology that contributed to the Industrial Revolution, most technological development did not arise from the direct application of the science of Galileo and Newton. So this is really interesting. Why is that? Well, that's because, it is because, come on, there we go. It is because the thinkers in the 17th and 18th centuries didn't always know the math and the physics, right? Most of them were men. There were a few women, but most were men. Were more like tinkerers, right? They were wealthy people. They probably received an education in the liberal arts or the humanities, or maybe natural philosophy. They had money. They could talk to people who did know the physics, but not all of them knew the math and the physics themselves. Even up into the 20th century, even think of somebody like Thomas Edison, right? Who invented thousands of different things, who founded, what was the company? Edison Machine Works, would go on to become General Electric. Invented a version of the light bulb. He didn't invent the light bulb, but he did invent a version of it. The story with Edison and the light bulb goes that he tried something like 1,000 times or 10,000 times to make it work. And this is usually given as a sort of inspirational quote, like, don't give up. Took Thomas Edison 10,000 tries or whatever. You know why? Because Thomas Edison did not know the theories of electricity, right? He was ignorant of this stuff. If he had just studied electricity, it would have taken him a lot fewer tries to get it right. He relied upon trial and error more than actual science. And you can see he has a team working at the Edison Motor Works. They're working on stuff for the war effort. And they want him to have a physicist. And he says, I don't need a physicist. I don't need a physicist for my electrical motors. Crazy. And if you really want to get an idea, you can just compare like Tesla. When Nikola Tesla was working for the Edison Motor Works, Tesla was actually brought in by Edison to solve problems that Edison didn't really know how to solve, because Tesla was a trained engineer. He knew the theories of electricity that he needed to know. And later on, Tesla would actually leave and join Westinghouse, another competitor company. And that's when the current wars started, right? Between alternate current and direct current. Pretty cool stuff in the history of science. But yeah, Edison was not a scientist himself. He was a tinkerer. And even in the present day, we can be misled by this understanding of technology as applied science. A lot of new inventions are actually accidental. They're not applied science, in the sense that, they're not applied science in the sense that, oh, I know some stuff about the world. I'm going to take it and make a thing with it. A lot of new inventions are not like that. They're completely accidentally stumbled upon. So some examples from the textbook: safety glass. The glass that's in car windows. It doesn't break apart when it won't shatter and go into a million pieces. It'll kind of stay in one sheet, so you don't have broken glass everywhere. That was discovered by accident when some chemicals were spilled on sheets of glass in a factory. And they were cleaning it up, moving the glass, and they noticed when they dropped the glass, it didn't shatter. Then they stumbled upon safety glass. Penicillin, such an important invention. Penicillin, an antibiotic medication that was discovered when some little petri dishes of bacteria became contaminated with penicillium mold. And they discovered that this mold produces penicillin, which is an antibacterial compound, right? Oh, cornflakes, really? Tell us about accidental cornflakes. I did not know that cornflakes were an accidental discovery. Well, while you're typing, if you're typing, I'll explain a couple more examples. Oh, the Post-it note is fun. This is actually an example of an invention that didn't go right. Somebody had invented some glue, but the glue wasn't very sticky and didn't really dry properly. So someone had invented some useless glue. So then somebody, Oh, it was a really botched granola attempt. Oh, okay, interesting. So yeah, someone buys the patent and says like, well, I can just use this to make little sticky notes. I won't use it as glue, but I can use it to make a note that'll stick, and I can remove it and stick it again. Right? Vulcanized rubber. That's the rubber we use in car tires. It's rubber that comes from, rubber comes from trees, but it has to be heated in order to become like the rubber that we're all familiar with in car tires. And I believe it was, I can't remember, Goodyear or Firestone, one of those folks accidentally discovered it. Yeah, okay, Goodyear. Thank you, Julian. Yeah, it was Goodyear. Even Worcestershire sauce. I was just thinking of this, maybe because I'm getting a little hungry. Worcestershire sauce is a condiment invented by these two chemists, Lee and Perrin. They were trying to remake this this sort of fish sauce condiment that some explorer or something had brought back with him from the East Indies or something, and it didn't taste good. They messed it up. They couldn't get the recipe right, so they kind of left the barrels and forgot about them, and they fermented, and then they became delicious. And now Worcestershire sauce is one of those fermented foods that not everybody likes, but if you ate it when you were younger, you probably like it. Like Marmite, one of those. It's one of those. So okay, let's move on. Actually, how are we doing for time? Okay, we're doing pretty good. Okay. So there's also this systems definition. Systems definition as a consensus definition. What does that mean? Well, Dusek writes that the technological system is the complex of hardware, possibly plants and animals. Oh, there we go. Knowledge inventors, operators, repair people, consumers, marketers, advertisers, government administrators, and others involved in a technology. The technological systems approach is more comprehensive than either the tools hardware or the rules software approach, as it encompasses both. Cool. So we're beyond the applied technology and onto the systems definition. This is it's broad, but it's broad in the sense that it encompasses a lot of what we've already talked about, and that might be a good thing. So furthermore, Dusek writes, the tool approach to technology tends to make technology appear neutral. It is neither good nor bad. It can be used, misused, or refused. The hammer can be used to drive a nail or smash a skull. The tool user is outside of the tool, as in the case of carpenter's tools, and controls it. The system approach to technology makes technology encompass humans, whether consumers, workers, or others. The individual is not outside the system, but inside the system. When one includes advertising, propaganda, government administration, and all the rest, it is easier to see how the technological system can control the individual rather than the other way around, as in the case of simple tools. Pretty interesting stuff. So we might be part of the system, and the system is it's not being controlled by us, right? And even though there's a lot I disagree with about Heidegger, this is one thing that I think that he was right about, is that when we think we are free, when we think we are in control of technology, that's when we know we're really not in control of technology at all, right? So we have this idea of autonomous technology. This isn't like autonomous vehicles or drones or anything. Rather, autonomous technology is the idea that technology, as I mentioned a moment ago, is not within our control. And this makes sense within the systems framework discussed here. I mean, think about the climate crisis, right? Think about climate change and how we're trying to deal with that. We're trying to deal with that when we're still in a system that's based heavily on fossil fuels And we're maybe not even in complete control of that system, right? Or what are some other examples of autonomous technology? Technology that's out of human control. Maybe nuclear weapons? Because think about it. Look at history. The Americans invent the nuclear bomb, or the atomic bomb. Then Russia needs the bomb, or the USSR at the time. Then everybody on the UN Security Council needs it. Britain, France, right? Everybody needs it. Now you have to tightly control that technology. You have to keep it around in case you need to have some mutually assured destruction, right? You have to be on guard that non-state actors like terrorists or something aren't going to try and steal your weapons, right? Langdon Winner, a really interesting theorist of technology, would say that these artifacts have politics, right? An artifact like a nuclear weapon or a nuclear reactor has certain sort of politics built into it. And I think that's kind of similar to this idea of autonomous technology. So maybe fossil fuels, maybe nuclear weapons. Anything else? Can anyone think of anything? Yeah, that's true. That's true. That is true. But that's not quite what this means, right? It's not whether we can understand what's happening or not, but whether we can have control over it, right? Max, go ahead.
This might sound a little basic, but like, don't we lose control of technology when it fails to function properly and it like has a breakdown? Like, let's say I have a machine and that machine is used to like, I don't know, swing a bat because it's like a pitching machine thing. And then for some reason it glitches. And then now it's like going crazy and swinging how it's not supposed to. And I can't control it. Like, I think
Well,
like, I'm kind of trying to go back to Heidegger where it's like the idea of thinking we have control over technology. It's like even the things that we do like have outline purposes, like they can possibly fail. And like, sure, we might know why they fail, or you can look back and see like how it fails, but there is like a certain degree of like a lack of autonomy over things, especially electronics, or I don't want to get into AI, but just like simple machine malfunctions. Like you're flying a plane and then the plane like is out of your control for some reason, you know?
yeah.
Like, even outside of a technological error, what if there's like a storm?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Right. I guess that's one sense in which technology can be autonomous. I think the sense that I'm thinking of it is that what the technology is doing, the means end stuff, is either out of control or the technology is doing something that we're not aware that it's doing to our way of being, to our way of existing, right? A very simple example would be like, Max, you look like you had an idea. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, camera on moment. Medical technology that has like huge like side effects later on that we weren't aware of, like most birth control stuff, or like
or thalidomide.
Like, or stuff in our houses, like asbestos, like just like lead. Yeah, it's just like the medical technologies that we create, like we have the control over like how we've made it, but then the effects are yet to be seen as to what control we have and also what control our own bodies have in reaction to stuff. So that's an idea.
CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, stuff like this is good. What I have in mind is something like let's say I buy a Tesla. I got a sweet Tesla, and I'm just using Tesla because it's, like sexy technology kind of thing. This example is actually not that technological, but it does show you, yeah, right, trolley problem in your Tesla. But so say that I got my Tesla, okay, but now I have this big expensive car, and I got to make the payments on it. So, now I'm working a second job, right? So now I'm basically working for my Tesla, right? This is the kind of thing. What I mean is autonomous technology is like, we think we're using technology. Autonomous technology is either not doing what it's intended to do by us, or it's using us, right? So it doesn't just mean like autonomous vehicles and stuff, but yeah, technology that maybe controls itself as a system, not as an artifact that does this or does this autonomously. Drug addiction. I don't know. Wow. Yeah, Bitcoin mining is a great example, Jonah. That's a fantastic example. Yeah, Zach. Yeah, I think you've captured it there. Yeah. It kind of takes on a life of its own. Exactly. That's what it means. Vicente had your hand up. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking of an example, but I believe I got an answer on the chat. I was thinking like, I don't want to get too political about it because I know it's a difficult subject, but I was thinking of some people that think like of the market or something like that is autonomous and also like better than if it was made by conscious humans, because it gets this autonomous working and everything.
Yeah, like like having a free market versus a market that's tightly controlled. The market's going to do things that we can't predict or control, right? I think that's also related to Jonah's Bitcoin example, and probably also related to like NFTs and stuff like that. Like any blockchain technology. Max, I can see you shaking your head there. Yeah. So it's weird. Like all of this kind of takes on a life of its own. Jonah, go ahead.
Vicente made a really cool point with the difference between planned economies and market economies, where they're two things that are doing, like two technologies doing fundamentally similar or even the same thing, but they're different machines. They're machines that function differently, and so they have different outcomes.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of would we rather keep the autonomy and maybe have the machine be, not perfectly attuned to its own self-growth and self-management, or do we want the machine to be autonomous, the technology to keep expanding itself and become cryptocurrency, use every computer in the world, turn our brains into blockchain machines, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I hope we don't go that far, but yeah, I think there is you can see the difference if you compare like a Western economy to say, maybe like state capitalism in China,
Yeah.
like, everyone is still like, oh, China's still communist. Well, not really. I mean, it's kind of just government controlled capitalism now, right? Like, and it has its advantages for their economy, but it also has some drawbacks, right? But I mean, second largest economy in the world, right? I mean, someone's doing something right, but both are ongoing, continuous experiments. So, we don't know. We don't know. Even a controlled market could still be autonomous. It just hasn't failed to behave the way we think it'll behave yet, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
What about agricultural technologies like selectively bred or introduced plants, vegetables? Yeah, that's another great example, right? That's a good example. Well, like the cane toad in Australia, right? Remember, there was some kind of pest, so some kind of cane beetle or something, right? Growing, taking over. So we'll just bring in some cane toads to eat the beetles. Well, they bred like crazy, and now there's like so many cane toads in Australia, and they're like an environmental menace, right? So that's another example. Definitely. Oh, 12:51. We're almost there. I think this is the last slide. So yes, the cocaine hippopotamuses. I've heard of those. Yeah, exactly. Like it's not just the cane toad, right? There's like cats and other pests. I really like Vicente's example. Yeah, Pablo Escobar had in his compound these hippopotamuses. He had all kinds of animals, you know, because he's Pablo Escobar. The cocaine hippopotamuses. Yeah, millions of rabbits, cane toads. Yeah, Australia, man. Don't import animals that your ecosystem cannot handle. Yeah, when I first heard of the cocaine hippos, I was like, what? Are they on cocaine? No, it's just because Pablo Escobar was like the first big famous drug cartel leader. He was the leader of the Medellin drug cartel, which trafficked cocaine into the United States. He was fantastically rich. I mean, probably one of the richest people in the world at the height of his success. He was imprisoned at one point, but I think he was allowed to actually build his own prison. It wasn't really a prison. It was just a cool compound with lots of cool stuff in it. And he you know, he was able to bring in animals and everything. And so he imported these hippos, and the hippos have gone feral. Right. And now there's this whole debate. What do we do with them? Right. Do we kill them all? Do we let them go? Or do we try and manage their population? Yeah. About 150. And their poop is really bad for the river, from what I understand. There's actually there's like a Vice News piece on this that you can find on YouTube if you guys want to check it out. But yeah, they're kind of messing up the natural ecosystem. So there's a debate what we do. Do we cull them all, or do we just like try and sterilize them to try to make their population more manageable? Like, what do we do? So there's a debate. Oh yeah. Yeah, the cocaine bear. They're making a movie about that, I've heard. Where I guess an airplane crashes, some drug runners crash, and a bear eats all the cocaine, and I guess rampages for a bit and then dies. Failed to parachute. Oh, I see. Oh, so they were like dropping it. Interesting. Poor bear. What a way to go. Oh, maybe it was a great way to go. I don't know. Anyway, so that's it for all our definitions. Now, some of you, I've seen a lot of variation in the terms of yeah, for about 5 minutes. I could not, I mean, oh boy. I mean, geez, imagine. I feel so bad for the bear, though. I feel so bad for the bear. So one of you will prefer some of these definitions over others. You know, maybe you don't think we can reach a general definition of technology at all, you know, maybe like some postmodernists, maybe you're like one of those, or maybe you think that we can reach a definition, and maybe you like one of the definitions we've covered today. But just keep them in mind as we keep on moving through the class. You know, as Dusek says at the beginning of this chapter, even if we don't reach a consensus on the definition of technology, we still learn a lot about technology by trying to define it. And I think we've learned a lot about technology today in trying to do it, in exploring all of these different definitions. So that's all for today. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I'll get this uploaded, and good luck on your critical responses. I think from the sounds of things, from what I've been hearing from some of you, there's some pretty interesting ideas that are going to be discussed. So I'm looking forward to reading them. All right, so that's it. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Oh, actually, I have a quick thing to mention. I know we're not talking about philosophy of science anymore,
Yeah.
but I went back and I did some research on Alfhaven and how to best conceptualize it in English. And I think this is what I've come up with. This is my best definition so far. So Alfhaven inherently means a change and a reversal. And the word reversal is not as accurate because a reversal applies that to something like, being inherently shifted to a different side. But that's not the case, where when a paradigm shift happens, when Alfhaven occurs, then like it's not only like a reversal of a way of thinking, but a replacement with something that contradicts the previous one, that creates a new, idea of society. So it's not necessarily a paradigm shift of like something shifting to a new thing. It's like a more aggressive, like philosophical takeover of knowledge.
Exactly. To overcome and negate at the same time. Yeah.
Overcome, negate, and then create a new one. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a cool word. I mean, what a cool word. So yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Excellent.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, no problem.
Looks so like all those in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, because if keep it in mind, and if anyone else is watching, or if anyone tunes into the live lecture and they're curious about the word too, then this will probably be helpful. So excellent. Thank you.
All right, see you next week. Bye-bye.
Yeah, see you then. Have a good weekend, everyone. And I'm stuck.